and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Courtney could not be here with us today. We have a lot, as is the norm, I think, for 2020, a lot going on. COVID-19 cases are skyrocketing in the U.S. They continue to skyrocket, and the death numbers are also going up. They are not going up quite as significantly, and people have pointed that out. But of course, when you have a confirmed case of COVID-19, the people don't die immediately. So the confirmed cases numbers are always about 2 weeks behind. They're a lagging indicator of whatever's going on in the country by about 2 weeks, and then the deaths are a lagging indicator from that number. So unfortunately, I think at this point there's nothing we can do to avoid seeing some reasonably catastrophic numbers coming up. The Anthony Fauci has testified that. Yeah, I apologize. I can deal with that at least. There we go. Hopefully the gain will be somewhat better on that. I apologize. Thank you for letting me know. So Anthony Fauci has testified that he sees, based on our current course, at a minimum, we're going to see, he expects 100,000 cases a day. 100,000 new cases every day in the United States. That's obviously, I mean, you're talking 1 million, of course, in 10 days, a little over a week. The mortality rates are still hard to zero in on, but we're going to try to get some numbers for that, and we're going to do an update. But as we consider what's going on in the United States, we were speaking with Christopher Maute, who we had on to discuss science communication, and it's interesting because I learned a lot. It takes, I think, a good deal of discipline to follow through with the techniques he was talking about. I like to think I have some discipline, but I'm not necessarily quite that disciplined. Every now and then I kind of get like, I'm right and you're wrong. So I found that very interesting. It is great to have him back. We are going to have him back now as a part of a two-part series where we are going to be discussing 3 studies that have come out and discussed the COVID infection rates based on the media you consume. So there's been a correlation found between certain kinds of programs that people watch and actually the infection rates of COVID-19. This is going to be a two-parter. The plan for now, I think, is to discuss today what these studies say, and then tomorrow to come back and actually challenge these studies a bit more. So without any further ado, let me bring out Christopher Maute. And so now all of a sudden I'm not in the show, but he is. I don't know how that happened, but he was. There we go. You were joking earlier.
I liked it better. I liked it better when it was a solo shot.
Well, then we had your presentation there earlier, and it was just yeah. Okay. Well, and then we had earlier, for those of you who don't know, and one of the things that we've been doing now is we actually, as many of you know, we take chat from the Discord. So if you're in the Discord, can't make it to the show, you can always just chat through the Discord, but you can now actually view the feed through the Discord. This is the back-end feed before it even gets to YouTube. And one thing I think we're going to do is during setups, we're going to have available for patrons access to the back-end feed, and they can just sort of watch, as we, some people I think are interested in that, and watch as we set up and get everything taken care of. But the other thing is, if you, for some reason, can't connect to YouTube, there will be a copy of the feed going directly into the Discord for people who want to view the show there. We're not doing that right now. We just wanted to make sure that we got the presentation and everything set up. But also, if you like the show, please like and subscribe. That really helps us out. You can do that now, and you can also, again, join us. I think we'll be continuing the discussion in the Discord after the show, and we'll be doing it again tomorrow. But Mr. Maute, how are you?
I'm doing quite well indeed. We had talked a little bit before we started recording. Today was a super productive day for me. So today, first thing I did when I got up is I made the slideshow for this show. So I have it. So for those of you watching, I have a slideshow presentation prepped. I feel like Floyd FP. He's like the PowerPoint presentation king of the internet. So
Yes,
I hope I do you justice, Floyd, in presenting a PowerPoint. So I did that. Then I went grocery shopping. Grocery shopping was super frustrating, man, just because everybody seemed to be in a grumpy mood. And I live in Lancaster, PA. So it's kind of red. Like we're the Susquehanna River away from Pennsatucky. So I think you're smelling what I'm selling. And so there was just there were a handful of people like walking around without a mask in like Target and the local grocery store Giant. And it was like, man, I'm not the guy to cause a scene. So that was a little frustrating. On top of the fact that people were like really in shitty moods. So it wasn't a good outing. Usually like I'm so starving for interaction that usually when I go out grocery shopping, it's like, yeah, how you doing? Yeah, no problem. My bad. No worries. Today, everybody was just like rotten. Somebody pissed in everyone's cereal. So then after I got the groceries done, I had lab meeting, and then I just kind of chilled out, waiting for this hang. Looking forward to it. I was looking forward to it. Now I regret it. No, I'm very much looking forward to
well,
it.
because this is the thing I forgot to mention. The reason I was mentioning the feed on the back end before the show, and we actually weren't streaming that, but you actually managed to get both spots on we had your camera on so you could have a conversation with yourself. I was just like, I'm not even needed anymore. I don't know why I show up, and yeah. You were disappointed when we got that changed. So
yeah, I mean, in the same way I was disappointed when you took away the solo shot of me during rehearsal. It was the solo shot of me and me on the big screen. It was just, it was the best looking format In Time's had in a while.
Yeah,
just saying.
I screenshotted it. That's going to be on we're going to put that on the new logo. That's going to be it's going to be the Chris Maute show with In Time as the occasional guest.
Yes, yes. I have a tendency of taking things over, usurping authority.
All right. Well, yeah, I was going to make an inappropriate joke. I'll stay away from that for now. It's too early for the inappropriate jokes. So the inappropriate jokes are at about 9 p.m. for the 9 p.m. shows.
Yeah, let's make this family friendly. Let's keep this family friendly.
So, let's see. So what we've got here is I'm going to bring up your slide deck here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of the premise of the show? Why are we doing the show, and what did these studies find, and what are we going to talk about?
All right. So this whole idea started on Monday, I think. I read an article, and I sent it to Nick. I was like, this would be super fun to talk about. He goes, I agree. So since then, I've been acquiring the articles in question, reading them, trying to break them down. So this is going to be kind of like a journal club, but much more like I'm not going to say watered down, but certainly I'm going to be painting in more broad strokes, hopefully without missing lots of the details, right? The research that we're going to be going over is not necessarily my wheelhouse. It's not specifically psychology. It's more social sciences and kind of economic social science. So they use some endpoints that I think are a little bit weird and questionable just because of my naivety. Some of it admittedly seems a little freakonomics-ish to me. That said, it all really has to do with misinformation and what misinformation in the news does to people's beliefs, and further, how those beliefs manifest as actions. So with that framing in mind, is it the case that we have an infodemic? Are we getting too much misinformation? So the article that I had sent Nick, you can see my mouse when I'm on this, right?
Yep, they can see the mouse.
My cursor, I should say. So the first article that I sent was this one on the right-hand side by Margaret Sullivan, and she referenced an article from her colleague, Christopher Ingram, from the previous Friday, and they're both in the Washington Post. And this perspective piece is like an opinion piece, whereas this analysis piece goes a little bit deeper into the details. So I really like this. For anyone who's more interested in this topic of news media misinforming the public and how that manifests as behaviors, as well as a breakdown of what channels with a focus on Fox, I recommend that you read both of these articles because I think they're both well written. I'll keep my opinions to. Oh, gotta wait till tomorrow. Right.
You're allowed. You know,
Right.
you are allowed
Self-control.
to. You are allowed to have an opinion and opine on on the. Just saying.
All right, yeah, let me do that. Let me show my biases up front because I think that's the most honest thing to do, and I'll hopefully maintain integrity in trying to navigate this landscape. I think that.
Let me interrupt. Yeah, because we can't go without biases. So best to just sit there and say. And if you didn't have an opinion that was worth hearing, you wouldn't be on the show. So let's.
Oh, thank you. All right, point made, point taken. So my bias is I think one of these articles is super good. And I think that the other two, which are admittedly working papers, one of them very much wants to be Freakonomics. And if you don't know what Freakonomics is, it's economists using social science to make correlations. And the Freakonomics book is fantastic. The authors are awesome. But this particular article is using one of the articles uses very obtuse endpoints to make their point, and then of those two working papers, that one's kind of weird for me, and the other one is a little bit better because it explains its variables better. It doesn't hedge its statements as much. So that's that. There are written critiques of these articles that hopefully I'll be able to access tonight and review tomorrow so that by the end of the show tomorrow we can synthesize the information that's being presented. Fair?
Sounds good.
All right. Shall we carry on?
Please.
Okay. So, if you take on the narrative that seems to be, if you combine both that opinion piece and the analysis piece, and you were to frame it in the most favorable terms, this little triangle, this bottlenecking to the right-hand side is kind of what you get. So, one of the articles concludes that exposure to social media is associated with more misperceptions and less social distancing compliance compared to news media exposure, right? And they focused on Twitter. So in general, they're saying the media misinforms, but news is better than social media. But then the other two studies kind of crack open the news media and say it has its flaws too if you do a deep dive into it. To the right. I see you, Michael. If you dip down into it, there's a difference between the channels and the information that is consumed, right? So the second article, this is the one that I think is a little Freakonomics-y. The persuasive effect of Fox, I have a typo there. The persuasive effect of Fox viewership on social distancing compliance is quite large. That's not the name of the article. That's just one of their conclusions. And the article itself, I referenced underneath each claim. And then to bottleneck it even further, okay, cool. The media is misinforming, social media more than news media. The news media itself is misinforming depending on what you watch, which channel. And then within that channel, it depends on what show you watch. So the third article concludes greater exposure to Hannity relative to Tucker Carlson tonight increased the number of total cases and deaths in initial stages of the coronavirus pandemic.
All right,
so again,
let me interrupt real quick, if that's cool. So greater exposure to Hannity relative to increased. So it's interesting because it sounds like what they're saying is it's causal, but that's not. I don't think that's necessarily the claim. But at any rate, so people who watched, what they noticed at a minimum was a correlation between people who watched Hannity having an increase in cases of COVID over Tucker Carlson, and in fact to the point where you could say that you could make some predictions as to who's what are the infection rates based on a viewer of Fox's Hannity versus Tucker Carlson's show. Is that accurate?
Yes.
All right.
That is accurate. There are more details. They did hold things. They did control for certain variables. They controlled for watching other Fox News shows as well. But to go into to go into those details, from my perspective, is kind of getting into the weeds in an unnecessary way. Like I want to be able to have like a from the hip conversation about this, right?
Perfect.
The details are the details. There are graphs, there are analyses that I can go into, and I might have to at some points, but I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible, right? Again, in science communicating, I'm going to try to give you the main gist of these things because that's the level of conversation this is. If this were a conference where I was doing a presentation, this would look very different. Okay. The first article that was referenced, the one that says that social media is more detrimental to compliance than news media, is this article right here. The causes and consequences of COVID-19 misperceptions, understanding the role of news and social media. And so they concluded that exposure to social media is associated with more misperceptions and less social distancing compliance, looking specifically at Twitter, compared to news media exposure. So I'll have the reference, and I don't know how clear this is on the slide, but my reference is here. Also, I'm going to make PDFs of this slideshow available to anybody who's interested. So I'll give,
and we'll put that.
I'll put it on Dropbox. Give
we'll
the link to Nick, and hopefully Nick can put it in the comment section.
Perfect. Yep, we can do that.
All right. So let's try to walk along the path of this particular research article to try to get in the headspace of why they came to their conclusions and how they did. The first thing they did was kind of just set the scene, right? So these graphs show the percentage of COVID-19 related content with different informational types. Every time you see red, that means that's how much misinformation is being provided. And if you look at the x-axis, these are 6 different graphs that are that have the same x-axis. It's either news, media, or social media, specifically Twitter. So the first one in the upper left-hand side, is vitamin C an effective cure for COVID-19? That misinformation was not so much seen in the news, but seen all over Twitter. And you can see of the amount of times that it was mentioned in a way that misinformed. The idea that it was caused by the consumption of bats. It got a little bit of play in news media, but in Twitter, it got a lot more play, right? And so without going through every one of them, you can see that in Twitter, the red is a little bit higher than it is in the news media relative to the actual height of each of them. And then when you look at public health recommendations, it's all over the news with as it pertains to hygiene and social distancing, whereas it's not seen at all on Twitter, either hygiene or distancing. So they're just setting the scene to say, hey, it's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of it's on Twitter, right? So this is the reason why we're focusing on Twitter, because just looking at the data, the descriptive analysis is they're the most guilty. So we want to focus on them.
And I think the other thing that's worth pointing out is they all seem to be reasonably small numbers, but as a percentage-wise, so on the conspiracy, Twitter, the misinformation appears to be 3-4 times higher than on the news. When it comes to no worse than the flu, that's almost 8 times higher, it looks like, on Twitter and then of course vitamin C. It looks like in the news the vitamin C is getting no play, but on Twitter it's all over the place. Relatively speaking, I mean the numbers are actually appear to be reasonably low, but relative the news sources relative to each other, the Twitter is significantly worse.
But and you're absolutely right, even though the numbers are small for the conspiratorial misinformation cues, look at how large the y-axis is on the hygiene and social distancing, right? 40% of news reports talked about social distancing as a public health recommendation, whereas less than 5% of that kind of information existed on Twitter. So, there's the omission and commission. Like, what are you omitting? What good information are you omitting? And what good information are you putting out there? They're just, they're playing fast and loose with both of them. They're not putting any good information out there and a little high on the misinformation.
Yep. Yep.
All right, people who are watching and have access to chat, please type your questions in as they come up.
You can type your questions. I can put them on the screen. And also, if you happen to be on America's cesspool, I mean, Twitter, you can also just at In Time Show or hashtag In Time Show, and we'll see those, and we can get those up too if you happen to be on the social media poison that is. I'm liking Twitter less and less. It's just but yeah, please, Grimace is an example of why. The character limitation actually is a brilliant idea. I think there's a lot of benefits to it that people don't see or understand right away. But one of the downsides is there's not much nuance, and it's about things that are catchy and grabby versus actual substance. Substance is a lot harder to do on Twitter than anywhere else. But I digress.
No, I totally agree. Couldn't agree more. So what I wanted to wrap this one slide up with just the finding that that accompanies it, right? The misinformation about COVID-19 is circulated more on Twitter as compared to traditional media. So that's their first finding, and this is kind of the graph that demonstrates their findings. Second finding in the same article, this is the first article looking at Twitter, is that there is a strong association between social media exposure and misperceptions about COVID-19. The inverse is true for exposure of traditional news. So what this is saying is the misinformation is causing misperceptions, right? Misinformation can exist all at once out there, but if it's not connecting to people, if people aren't taking it on board and therefore causing misperceptions about things, then it's for naught. So, or not. So one way of looking at that is, okay, we know the misinformation is out there. Is it changing people's perceptions? Cool. Step two, this makes great sense as far as a line of logic goes, trying to unpeel the onion, so to speak. And to make sense out of this, I just would like for you to pay close attention to the black dot, which is the amount of misperception. For people who are exposed to regular news, the misperceptions are low. For people who are exposed to social media, the misperceptions are high. Right? And then they break it down into, aside from misperceptions, the risk perceptions and social distancing. And for the social distancing component, I'm sorry, for the which one is which? My eyes are so bad. The bottom one green? Yes. So for the social distancing one, wow, I'm colorblind. You see, for people exposed to social media, a very low compliance in social distancing, and people exposed to news media, a very high compliance. So this misinformation is manifesting as behaviors, or perceptions, at least.
Which is what one would. Well, yeah, okay. So then the perceptions will obviously one would expect that to influence behavior. We do have a question, so let me get that up. Michael Westby asks, what would a media outlet like Fox have to gain by giving potentially dangerous advice to their viewers? Any thoughts on that?
What would they have to gain by giving dangerous information to their viewers? I don't know if I understand the question, right? Because if their viewers' demographic is older, and they're being told there's nothing wrong, then that misinformation could kill off the population, the demographic that Fox relies on. So you would think that it's in Fox's best interest to put the best information out there so it can maintain its hold on the market. Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question.
Well, no, I think that's the crux of the question. I think it's a couple of things. I think first of all, obviously, I mean, Fox is obviously on the right and a very strong right leaning. But I think it's a mistake to think that the organization thinks as a whole. It does. They steer the ship in a general direction, but there are individual shows and there's individual. And I think the reality is what they care most about is what any business probably would, should, and or would in their circumstances, which is getting viewers, making money, becoming popular, and becoming successful. And in that case, it does sometimes tend towards short-term thinking and reactionary thinking over long-term thinking. And I think they know that what their viewers want to hear is they want to hear that these are conspiracies. They want to hear that the liberals are doing all these terrible things, and they know that that's what sells and that's what gets people tuning in from show to show. So the long-term consequences of that kind of behavior is something where they just sort of kick the can down the road. I don't think they're sitting there saying, we want to miseducate our audience. We want to, but I think their goal first and foremost, and this is true of most businesses, is to get people watching. And then,
and so in order to do that, they have to maintain a certain amount of outrage. Their favorite villain for that outrage is the left, and the left are the ones who are claiming that this is a big deal. So, like, their stock response is denial, or was denial on the Hannity show. Maybe or maybe not. We'll see.
Much better put than I had. But I will say, because we have actually covered this on In Time. We've covered the differences between Hannity's coverage and Carlson's coverage. And Carlson was an outlier from day one and said, this is very serious, this is not a conspiracy, and nobody's doing any justice to anybody by saying that this isn't an extraordinarily serious threat. That was Tucker Carlson from day one, and he was outcast very quickly on Fox News and we even have clips of Hannity coming out and saying this is a conspiracy from the left, and then 2 weeks later coming out and saying we've never said it was a conspiracy. I mean, we did a brief segment on the flip flop there, but Carlson's been consistent from the beginning. But I guess so. Again, it's not a single. They're not getting orders from headquarters. Everybody who's there is there to push a conservative message because that's the message they want to push, but they also want to be successful. And yeah, so I think you said it better than I did, but that is a marked difference between the two.
And also, as an example, actually, so speaking of how popular they are, we're going to get to that in the next study. But I might as well just say it now. Fox is so popular that so one of the factors that's looked at in these studies when you're looking at television stations is what is their number in the cable lineup, right? Is it channel 1, or is it channel 150, or is it channel 300, or is it channel 500, right? Because it has been shown in some social research that the lower the number, the more access people have to it, because when they're flipping through the channels, they're usually starting at the beginning and going up. And it's like, okay, here's a news channel. CNN usually wins that spot. And Fox is almost always on the later end of the numerical system, the ordinal numerical system of a cable system. Yet, it has the most viewers. So, like that's how strong of a lockdown they have on their demographic. That, the normal tendencies on channels being earlier, getting more viewership, are destroyed by like their juggernaut of I don't know, what's the word I want to use? Affiliation, cult members, brainwashing, propaganda. I think that covers it.
Yeah.
That said, let's move on then. So yeah, I don't know. The trying to figure out the intent of these big corporate conglomerates in these kinds of decisions is just like, who knows? Who knows how many meetings they had and how many people were in those meetings and how many people contributed.
Well, Agrippa,
it's fun to think about. It's fun to
fear in that demographic doesn't sell well. They want confirmation bias. I think he's right. I think, especially as you get older, people as they get older, they do get more conservative. They tend to prefer something that plays to how they already perceive the world. Their brain isn't as nimble. It's harder to make new connections. One of the things is, and one of the reasons for this is, the older you get, the more connections your brain has already made to understanding the universe, understanding the world that you live in. And any significant change to that requires the breaking of other connections in that web and realigning far more. So that's why the younger you are, the easier it is to adjust your worldview. The older you get, any adjustment requires retconning a huge amount of information. So I think by the time you get older, you much prefer, you are more comfortable with and genuinely enjoy things that reaffirm that which you already believe instead of things that challenge you in any meaningful way. And again, that's not a knock on age. That's a result of having already amassed so much information.
That's development. You're talking about developmental psychology, right? Through life, we build a structure that is based on our mapping of reality. We use that structure for successes. When we've reached the point of successes, we adore that structure, right? And anything that challenges it is like, oh, come on now. It worked for me.
Yep,
right?
yep.
There's that like weird developmental psychology of like either you have integrity or despair in later years. And it is based on like what you consider successes and whether you achieve them and what structure you used to get there. That's what changes from generation to generation, it seems.
Yep. Yep. All right. So I think I cut, but that was I think Agrippa had sort of made that point, and so I wanted to. And Dragnaut Silvis, the outrage works on simple minds. Wouldn't want to assume that everyone has the same irrational response, which I think is a valid point and or criticism. So please continue.
So real quick, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's watching this, if you're digging this, please hit the like button. And if you're new to this channel, this is Nick's channel, please hit the subscribe button and let us know how we're doing in the side chat.
Absolutely. Please.
Cool.
Thank you.
No doubt. I've done this a couple times.
Yeah, I know. You are. It's funny because I've actually only just recently met you. I met you not all that long ago, but you are. It's I learn more and more that you're very, very old guard and been doing this a lot longer than I have. So it's been a genuine pleasure getting to meet you and getting to know you. So we got to get back to our sort of morning chats because I thoroughly enjoyed those, but it's been a little crazy. But anyways, let's off.
I mean, when this article came up, the chat we had on Monday was like so good. It lasted the week. I mean, because we were both like all over, like, hey, can you believe this? Like, what can we do? And then it turned into like a fun little like what do you call it? Like spitballing session. As I went for my like walk around the neighborhood, me and Nick are like, well, we can do it like this. Well, how about we frame it like this? Well, I can try to find the articles. Well, yeah, I can try to do this. Okay, let's do. How about Thursdays and Friday? Okay, 2:00 both days. Yeah, it was awesome.
But I think the other good news is I think you and I both have reasonably similar biases, which can make it enjoyable but we can also feed them, and we're aware enough of tooting our own horn, perhaps, but. It's like where I in particular started to say, well, wow, this really demonstrates it. Like, Nick, hold on. That's where I wanted to go too. But let's think about that. It's, oh, okay, yeah. And then, so that's another really enjoyable part of it.
I'm not going to deny conversations are fun. Like you've quickly turned into somebody who, like, if you busted my chops about going in the wrong direction, conversation or topic wise, like you're somebody I'd listen to. So.
Oh, well, thank you.
Enough backslapping for crying out loud.
Welcome to the Backslap Show. This is Christopher Maute hosting in time.
All right. Moving on. We're still on the first article.
You had recommended this be in 3 parts.
Between the 2 days.
You had recommended this be in 3. You had recommended originally we do this in 3 parts, and I think this is part of the reason why. But please continue.
Like, let's start with 2. Maybe 3 if we need it. So here's the third finding from that first article. I just want to review real quick, just in case anybody just tuned in while we were slapping each other's backs. There we go. So this first article, which I'm kind of designating as the super general media misinformation article, like the media misinforms, especially social media, especially Twitter. And their first finding is misinformation about COVID-19 is circulated more on Twitter as compared to traditional media. Second finding is there's a strong association between social media exposure and misperceptions about COVID-19, with the inverse being true for traditional news. And then the third finding is that these misperceptions that were shown in the second finding about the pandemic are associated with lower levels of risk perceptions and social distancing compliance, right? Social distancing compliance is the behavior part of the misperception that is caused by the misinformation, if you're following the logic.
Yes.
So I purposely outline just this top bar so you don't get confused with these things here, the controls and no controls. I can go into it, but I won't. It'll just take too long. So we just want to focus on these top lines where we can see that the effect on risk perception, these misperceptions from Twitter had a negative effect on risk perceptions, meaning they perceived less risk than did people who got their information from traditional media. And the same thing with social distancing, which is the actual behavior. There's certainly a negative effect on social distancing caused by these misperceptions than on regular social media or even regular news exposure. So the misperceptions that are specifically caused by Twitter as compared to general social media exposure and general news exposure, this is the difference that we're seeing. Regular news exposure causes more compliance with social distancing.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, social media exposure doesn't have a general effect. But within social media, when you look at Twitter, the misinformation on Twitter is all the way back here. That's the kind of negative effect the misinformation on Twitter can cause. All right.
So now
that's the first point.
Was that adjusted for what was that the overall effect, or was that the effect for people who were receiving that information?
This is based on survey information. So these are self-reported consumers of these platforms, and then they answered questions about their perceptions, and then about risk perceptions, and then questions about their social distancing behaviors. So this is all based on survey data, as I understand it.
That makes sense. Okay, so this isn't the data of, explicitly the people who have been exposed to misinformation on Twitter. This is just the people who have been on Twitter. This is the result. So we found one set of data that shows that there is misinformation, and then another set of data that, people who are on Twitter, this is their so this isn't a subset of those who have been exposed specifically to information, just those who have been exposed to Twitter, which we know has a greater amount of misinformation.
Yes, and there were controls in place. They controlled for beliefs in pseudoscience, beliefs in anti-intellectualism, their scientific literacy, and their ideology. So it was a pretty expansive questionnaire survey, it seems. And they included a bunch of the questions in the, appendix. It seemed very, very cool. So that's the end of that one article. And when I say the end, I mean the end of what we're going to be covering today about that article. It is a super interesting article. It's one of the better of the three articles. Now we're going to move on to the one that I was kind of complaining about. And in the bottlenecking stages, this is the one that kind of calls out Fox as misinforming above and beyond other regular traditional news sources. So in the side chat, I happened to see something real quick. Did we overlook a question by Holy Spackle?
I may have missed it. Sorry, I've been trying to keep up with the live chat. Let me quickly check. We've had a.
And thank you, Ryrez, for sticking up for Holly and making sure that it didn't get swallowed. Do you think it's Twitter and Facebook's responsibility to filter and sort what is responsible?
I did. That's a very good question, and I did. Oh, yep, that was Spackle, and I did miss it. So let's put that up.
Put it up.
And that was, in fact, that was a question that I was discussing with Porpoise earlier too. Do you think it is Twitter's and Facebook's responsibility to filter and source what is responsible? We have to have a show on that. I think that's its own show. It's a difficult question for a lot of reasons. But what are your thoughts?
I think that we, as in the public, as well as the owners of the platform, need to decide what the platform is. Is it a publication outlet or not? Because if it is, then that means we have a different strategy to pursue. So I think that needs to be decided first. If it is a publisher, I think that they have more responsibility in the content that is put out. But if they're not, then they don't. So I don't, and since I don't use them, I don't have a dog in the fight, so I don't have many feels about it.
I think that's I think that's I think they need a mission statement in regards to, and a public one in regards to how they're going to deal with, because I understand their desire to not have to police that platform. I mean, I forget how many tweets there are a second, but it's huge, and they can't check all that. On the flip side, people are using it as a news source, and I think they'd like people to continue doing that. So right now they're getting the best of both worlds. They're getting people who are using it to spread information, but they're not doing it. That's a tough. I think you got it. I don't think I have much to say more over what you said. I think you got it.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, I missed that.
If there's nothing else. Okay, I think that's it. So Reed was saying statistics show over and over, year after year, Fox News watchers are consistently the most misinformed group. Yeah, I remember when Jon Stewart was the host of The Daily Show, him reviewing statistics that kind of showed that. Yep. Admittedly, this is the first time that I've looked into social science research about politics and TV viewership and stuff. And it's interesting. Like, what's most interesting about it, I'll admit, is that they come from a position that is literally the deficit model, the very thing that I spoke about we should be not doing when we talked about science communication. So there seems to be a complete disparity of opinion. What was that? What was that noise?
Yeah, I heard that. That came. Yeah.
So my daughter's refusing to answer me.
Uh-oh, that's a bad sign.
Hopefully everything's okay. What was I saying? So they very much think like misinformation needs to be corrected right away, and that has a positive effect. And they've even done studies showing like, and it doesn't matter how you do it. You can be surly about it, you can be neutral about it, or you can be kind about it. The way that you deliver correction for misinformation doesn't matter. It still has an effect on that person not being misinformed anymore. It doesn't have an effect on their behavior or beliefs, though. Just on that particular topic, it can have an effect on changing their correcting their misinformation, so to speak. But it doesn't have a strong enough effect to change the whole web of knowledge that particular line is serving.
Or change behavior. It sounds like they compartmentalize that, so if you demonstrate, and I've seen this before, so when it was proven that Fox lied about the numbers at Trump's inauguration. In fact, they showed footage from a different inauguration, and they got busted doing this. And actually, it wasn't even an inauguration. I'm sorry. They showed numbers from it wasn't a rally, but it was something it was from a march or something. They showed the numbers from that, which had a much higher numbers than his inauguration. And you show that, and what people do is instead of saying, okay, Fox is saying things that aren't true, they say, oh, Fox did this one thing, and so they may correct that piece, but it doesn't seem to change the entire web. I will say, so Fox viewers do tend to, and it's been studied time and time again, they tend to be, of all the major network news sources in the United States, Fox viewers tend to be the most incorrect about well-accepted facts. So, for example, were there WMDs in Iraq? When we invaded Iraq, were there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? I think something like 40% of Fox viewers say yes, there were, which is staggering, and it's accepted. It's an accepted fact by the UN, by the United States. George W. Bush came out and said, no, there were not. We got that wrong. And yet, so it's not a contested fact. That it's a fact. There were none. And Fox viewers remain ignorant of that fact. And so there was a list of, I think, 40 facts that were handed out. And they said, okay, and there were different news organizations where you would score higher or lower on your ability to identify what is a fact and what isn't. And Fox News scored abysmally low regularly, which for a news organization is rather unfortunate. But I digress. We could do another thing on just Fox News. So let's continue. But I think it's an important. Yeah. So I know what you're talking. I know what he's talking about. Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about just because, I mean, it speaks to group dynamics, right? And also how we cobble our memories together. Our memories are reconstructions, and we fall prey to biases, like we were talking about previously. And one of them is like the primacy effect and the recency effect. Primacy effect, when trying to memorize long lists of words, is the ability to remember the first word in the list, and the recency effect is the ability to remember the last word, right? But it's not only specific to lists of words. Memories in general, you generally remember the first bit and the last bit. That's why you end with a bang and you come in hot. So when it is reported that there were weapons of mass destruction, and no efforts are being done to correct it, all you have is the primacy effect, where like even if they mention it offhandedly, like, oh, and then it's been shown that the weapons of mass destruction don't really exist, they're probably going to correct it, but in such a offhanded, like, by the way kind of method, where they probably spent full shows on whether, on the fact that there are weapons of mass destruction, right? So it's like, it's super tough to determine intent. And even when you line up behaviors, somebody can just be like, oh, well, that's just coincidence. If I take each one of those events and break it down, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why it happened.
I think that's an excellent.
That's just human behavior in general.
And Fox did correct it. Fox has corrected it, and even Fox's position is there were no weapons of mass destruction. But you're right; they corrected it in like a 5-minute offhand casual thing, and then. But I think one other, just because, oh God, you and I could just talk for hours. Because of that effect, actually, that's one of the reasons why they say one of the best ways to study is to break it up so you have more starts and stops. So instead of studying for an hour straight, where you learn most you memorize most what was at the beginning and at the end, and lose most of what's at the middle. Study for 10 minutes, take a break for 5, study for 10, take a break for 5, so on. So and keep intermixing these breaks, and then you get more starts and stops, and you remember overall much more because of that exact. It's interesting that you can trick yourself into. You and I just find this stuff fascinating, so we'll keep talking about it forever.
All right, so where are we at? What time are we at?
Well, we got some. We got some time. It doesn't have to be a solid hour, and we do have at least the second show. But so you were on. Yeah,
I mean, I only have one slide for this next study. So how about if we go over this, and then we'll save the third study for the next jam. If I can get my hands on the critique article, we'll go over that too.
Perfect.
And then we'll spend the last third of the show just like, all right, what do we think? Here's what they're saying. Here's how it's reported. Do they match?
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. So this one, again, it's a working paper out of the Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics at University of Chicago. So I have to believe that these guys know what the fuck they're doing. But it also happens that the main author of Freakonomics also is at Chicago. So these might just be fanboys. Listen to me speculate. Oh man, I must really not like this. I'm speculating like crazy here. All right. So the dumpster fire that is this article, this is the only slide that I could find that demonstrates the thing that they're claiming, which is that the persuasive effect of Fox viewership on social distancing compliance is quite large, meaning it's a negative effect. So if I can.
So the more Fox you watch, again, this is not a causal study, but the more Fox you watch, it appears to correlate to not taking social distancing very seriously or not engaging in social distancing.
Yeah, but let me go over the operational definitions here real quick.
Right.
So their data set for viewership of Fox is, there we go. So for viewership, they used data from 2015, the 2015 Nielsen NL TV data set that was categorized by zip code. They have rationales for why they did that. One of those rationales is the way that Nielsen collects data has recently changed so that it doesn't have as robust a zip code breakdown as previous data. They also take great pains to show that channel viewership as well as channel location in cable areas doesn't change very much over years. So based on these as well as other reasons, they think that it's legit to use 2015 viewership data for 2020 results. Do you see where like the beginnings of my skepticism are?
I do.
But I don't know whether this is a normal move. It might be the case that everyone in the field is like, yeah, since they changed those the way they collect data, we have to rely on 2015 data.
Well,
like, I don't know whether that's the thing.
The question isn't, I think, the question isn't whether it's normal or not, I think, as much. I think the question is how much.
If it's normal, then that means that there's a precedent set where it has gone through the ringer as a legit instrument that has been normalized.
I think that's a fair point, but somebody has to normalize even the most used, techniques. I don't think if it I agree if it's been normalized that would make it stronger, but that it hasn't, in my mind, isn't necessarily a weakness, if that makes sense. It's just I agree why it's not as strong as it could be. The reason I say it's not necessarily a weakness is because we don't know how rapidly numbers change year to year. Now, if we were talking about polls of somebody's popularity in a presidential race, those change week to week and sometimes rapidly. So if I were to take a poll of Howard Dean at that time, the numbers would be off the chart. And then a month later, Howard Dean's numbers were at near zero. And all he did was go, yeah! That's literally all he did. And his numbers tanked.
Into a hot mic.
Yeah, so 5 years in politics is 5 lifetimes. A little less than that. So 5 years is a lifetime and a half, actually, because it's really an election cycle. But on Nielsen ratings,
one.
Yeah. On Nielsen ratings, it's not that bad. I don't know. I mean, 5 years is still a lot, and certainly individual shows can go up or down a lot in 5 years. But it's not quite the same thing. And if you're talking about the direction of a channel, how much has Fox News changed in 5 years? How much has MSNBC changed in 5 years? How much has CNN changed in 5 years? How much has any of these networks changed in 5 years? They've all changed, but not by a lot. If I said any statement I make about the general quality of MSNBC 5 years ago is reasonably applicable today, and same thing with Fox News, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and in addition to looking at whether the content has changed, the viewership, I mean, brand loyalty is a thing for a reason, right? And here's another thing. So one of the reasons why I kind of want to give these guys a break is because they mention all of this. They delimit all of their results and couch it in very cautious terms throughout this working paper. And so I appreciate that, but I'm not used to reading a paper that qualifies everything that they do so much. Right? Like if you're like, hey, we're using 2015 instead of 2020, and I know that's a bad idea, but here's why. And we think it's a good idea because viewership doesn't really change, but that could be different because it has nothing to do with what the content is. It has to do with what kind of person is drawn to Fox News. And it's like, well, then what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, that would make me skeptical. I admit, a lot of hedging and guarding and qualifying should be sending up red flags. I'll admit.
So in addition to that, they also, I want to give them, they are very statistically savvy, but this persuasive effect is a calculation that they came up with. So it's their own instrument that isn't validated, right? So the data that it generates, who knows how reliable or valid it is. But it is this persuasive effect that is the end point. It is a manipulated, and they had to jump through many hoops to get to this persuasive factor. And also, they're not using surveys to determine people's beliefs or behaviors. They're using cell phone data, their GPS data as collected by SafeGraph. So a part of me is like, okay, well, that's an indirect endpoint of social compliance, social distancing compliance from my perspective. But it might be one of those things where, don't listen to what people say, look at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'll happily give them the indirect okay on this. Like they need my fucking permission, right? But yeah, like I'm skeptical about it in ways that I can't. I'm not smart enough to determine what part of it has to do with naivety of this field and how they do things, and which things like just don't pass the smell test.
No, and I think there is something to be said for following your gut when you see something like this, because if you've been around it long enough, you have an idea. And when they do start to do qualifiers, I remember I think it was in 2012. I was just trying to look up the study. I can't find it, but I think it was UCLA. A study came out, and it just destroyed a lot of sort of liberal notions. And I remember getting smacked around on it by social media line. So, I'm going to take a look at this study. And first of all, the university that hosted the study distanced themselves from it and said, look, it was just two professors here. It's not a UCLA study. It's just these professors here. They were paid for by, I think it was the Koch brothers to do the study. And when you looked at their methodology, and people were cherry picking what this study found. So it found that a bunch of people were far left leaning and had these left leaning biases. But the way they calculated biases was how many times somebody mentioned a left leaning or right leaning organization. And first of all, they actually declared these organizations ahead of time, which, okay, but you can declare them to get any results you want. But if you say the ACLU is left leaning and the NRA is right leaning, I'd be with you on both those calculations, both those assumptions. But when you read the data, because they weren't taking into account the context in which they were mentioned, when George W. Bush came out and said, "Oh my God," if he came out and said, "I hate the ACLU, hate it, the ACLU is the worst organization ever," that would hit him up +2 on the liberal side for mentioning the ACLU twice, even though he mentioned them in a negative context. So they invented their own methodology. And so I looked at their final results, and they printed these conclusions. I think they didn't expect anyone to actually go through and find the tables and the conclusions at the end. But they found that the NRA, as a result of this, if you looked at how many times the NRA mentioned the ACLU or other left-leaning organizations, the NRA was considered to the left of the ACLU. And I was just like, any study that finds that in their conclusion the NRA is to the left of the ACLU, I was just like, and people were running around saying, this is great. There was a whole NPR thing, but long story short, making up your own methodology can lead to that, and it looks like and then B, that's why you just should look at it when you sit there and say, hey, wait a minute, something seems wrong. Because I remember reading that methodology. It's like anytime they mention a left-leaning organization, that causes them to be more to the left. No, that just means that they could be on the right, and they're attack dogs, and then you're going to end up with Rush Limbaugh being on the left.
That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is why you should always go to the source. Just always go to the source. If you're reading an article about an article, read the original article. Make up your own. Don't let other people make up your mind for you, I guess is the point.
Yep.
Just like, because methodologies sometimes suck. Sometimes shitty stuff gets past peer review.
Just as a reminder,
part of the self-correcting process of science.
Right. Just as a reminder, we are doing an after show. Anyone who wants to go into the Discord and hang out in the after show chat, I'll be there. I don't know if you're going to have time, but so we had to ask about it. So, perfect. All right. Well, so please let's continue. We'll finish the last slide.
All right. So this slide here, and this is fun because I loved looking at all the equations because they look beautiful. I am not math inclined to get it, but This top graph is generated by what they're denoting as the Fox News effect, and that's not just a random thing. It is a variable that they calculate using their own method. But as you can see, compliance with staying home, once the state of emergency was announced on March 15th, compliance went down for people who were watching Fox. So that's why they consider the persuasive effect of Fox as driving this behavior. Again, this behavior is based on cell phone GPS data. And the reason why they say it has such a big effect is because when they contrast it to CNN, people who are, and also you can use everything to the left of the dotted line as a baseline from which to compare everything to the right of the dotted line. So as you can see in both situations, both Fox and CNN viewers, of course, these are differences. So everything's going to level off at the 0 mark, but they kind of stay there with just a lot more variance for the people who watch CNN as compared to the people who watch Fox, who just when it was officially what do they call it? Officially announced as an emergency, as a state of emergency, they didn't really seem to think that was important enough to stay home in a way that people who watched CNN did. So that's their main point, right? They really kind of go like, oh, of all the traditional news sources that are available, Fox is particularly bad at misinformation, or they're particularly good at misinformation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hold on one moment.
All right, so I'll take this opportunity. If you're enjoying the show, please hit that like button. Also subscribe. It really does help the channel out. We appreciate it. We will be having an after show in the Discord. My suspicion is we'll be wrapping up in about 10 or 15 minutes, and I will be there. Christopher will be there, and would love to chat with you guys. We're also going to be doing a part 2 to this, where we're going to be discussing a third study and some of the problems with these studies, or some of the questions that we have tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard. And Courtney, I think, will be able to join us for that, which will be spectacular. So again, please like and subscribe, and then, you can come join us in the Discord for the after show. But so you were saying.
Okay, so sorry, my daughter wanted to make sure that if she made some ramen for lunch, that it wouldn't be too noisy. So tomorrow we'll go over this next article, misinformation during the pandemic. I think that we kind of have an idea. And by the way, these aren't the only 3 articles that are addressing this. There's a whole literature here. We're covering these 3 articles specifically because these are the 3 articles that are mentioned in this analysis article in the Washington Post by Christopher Ingram. So that's why we're focusing on them. But this is fun, I have to admit, being able to delve into this social science that is specifically about persuasion, which is a psychological topic, but it's treated so very differently between science communicators versus whatever the fuck this is. Like political science, is this poli-sci, economics? Like, I don't know what the fuck to call this. Because they're like, science communicators are like, please don't use the deficit model. Whereas these people are like, you have to. The people who are misinformed have a deficit that needs to be corrected, and correction is good. So maybe it's the difference between like science communicators who can take their time and aren't in a hot emotional state like a pandemic versus political signals and misinformation that drives behaviors. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like maybe it's category error, right? Like using the deficit model in science communication is applying it in the wrong category. Maybe it has its use and it's here and not science communication, even though this does fall under the umbrella of science communication properly.
Well, ostensibly, one watches the news to become educated. One watches the news to learn what is going on. But
to be informed, yes.
Yeah. So I would assume, and I maybe this is just spitballing here, but I would assume that you would actually expect to be sort of the recipient of the deficit model. You're saying, okay, there's something I'm lacking, and I want to have that filled in. Now, whether or not that you actually have that expectation when you watch the news or not is another thing. I think people are notorious for thinking they want one thing and really wanting something else. We don't understand our own motivations very well
That's where
at
looking at
all.
behavior instead of listening to words has its advantages.
Yeah. I think that's a good. I think the behavior is in fact.
But I'm gonna push back a little bit on your previous point if I'm understanding it right,
Please.
because it's like, yeah, the news providing misinformation is different than having misinformation that is corrected.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So if your point is, yeah, we watch the news to become informed, and if they inform us with bad stuff, that's not really science communication, or is it? Right? Whereas like the focus for me is the persuasion component. Like, okay, now that you have wrong information, what persuasion technique is going to facilitate you taking on board the better information, right? From my perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what's being addressed here more important.
Okay.
How they got there, I think, is a different topic.
Yep. Good point. Good point.
Related.
Well, and I think it helps in the solving of the problem. Is I think understanding how you got there is a necessary component of that. But I think you're right. It's not. It shouldn't be it's not the focus. It's not the. I mean, that's a different. Yeah, I agree. Makes sense.
But hold on. I guess I can jump to the very last slide because it's kind of a take-home point thing, and I think it's worth looking at even though we haven't gotten through the whole presentation, right? The third article that we're going to go over just has these great take-home points, just hitting home runs here. Misinformation is an important mechanism driving the effects in the data, and we'll be looking at that specific data tomorrow. But they pretty much show that Hannity viewers are less compliant than Tucker viewers. And they say it's because of misinformation specifically. That is the mechanism of action, which is a bold statement to make, right? And their results indicate that the provision of misinformation on mass media can have significant societal consequences. So this is another thing. All three of these articles seem to have a bend towards how do we correct this problem? Let's take a closer look at this problem for the purpose of correcting it. So I found that interesting too, because it seemed very agenda driven in a way that I'm not used to saying.
Yep.
So, and this take home point, I mean, I would be remiss not to just point to everybody. How is it that you spot fake news? These 8 points. Read beyond, consider the source, supporting sources, go to the original. Do others agree? Is there a consensus of experts on the information that you're hearing? Are they kidding? Is it a joke? Are they being sarcastic? Check your biases. Ask the experts and look before you share. I mean, these just like the basics. I wish that, this was posted just randomly in cities.
Social media hygiene, actually.
Bathrooms.
It's social media hygiene is what it is. It's because if people,
looking at it.
Yeah, well, no, I remember one too because we're trying to build a reputation for being reliable. We have biases too, but we're trying to be reliable. And I remember when Trump was running for office, and that meme came out that was of a New Yorker interview where Trump said, "If I ever ran for president, I would run as a Republican because they're idiots and it's easy to get one over on them." And that one was going all over Facebook at the time. And I remember looking at it and because it played so well to my biases, I was like, that's almost too good. And so before I shared it, I looked it up. Sure enough, it was fake. I was just like, yeah, so I do try. And this is one that it can get you into trouble, actually, this kind of activity, because but the one thing I do try to do is when something plays into my biases, I tend to demand actually extra evidence of it to sort of compensate for that, where I say, okay, because I like what I'm hearing, I'm going to investigate just a little more and double check and make sure. And I think that's usually when I hear something that I like and that confirms. Yeah. Sorry, what?
I was just listening to Sam Harris, and one of his most recent podcasts was about being aware of your feelings, right? if you're feeling really good about a piece of data because it fits your narrative or your pre-existing biases, or if something strikes you as like reflexively wrong, like in either of those circumstances, that should be a signal that you should take a step back, take 3 breaths, and let your system 2 thinking kind of take over, because like that kind of emotional reaction could lead you deeper in a more polarized direction, or not. Maybe you work your best when you're emotional. That would be weird, but
that's not consistent with. I will tell you. I will tell you this. It's been my experience that the worst mistakes I've ever made in my life have all been under one condition, and that's a heightened emotional state of some kind: anger, love, whatever it is, even love, whatever it is. Those are the ones that, yeah. And it's been my experience. That's what I've observed of others too. I haven't sat down and done a study on it, but I'm gonna plant a flag there.
It's an exercise in impulse control. Like right when you feel like you should be the most active because you're the most aroused, that's the time when you should take a step back. Take a step back. This is too good to be true. It probably is. Oh, that's inherently false. Maybe it's not.
Yep. No, I think that's.
You should just beware. Beware of your emotional state and how your passions can be the elephants driving the driver.
Christopher Hitchens said something to that effect, and it said that there's a much more richer life to be gained by being able to do that, to be able to step back and look at things honestly. The more honest your view, the richer life becomes. I think there's a lot of truth to that. It doesn't necessarily look that way. We think richness comes from the passion. I think passion's important, but richness, I think, comes from understanding.
Oh, indeed, and passion's good for the experiences. You want passion to be there to experience the things that you're experiencing, the beauty, a vacation, and whatever, a date night with your significant other. Like you want passion to be there, right? Time and place, making super critical decisions. That could better be served in a cold emotional state. Maybe that's
not a good idea,
right?
Yeah.
Maybe all right. So you want to switch over to the after show?
Yeah. Let me do this. So let's quickly talk about what we have coming up. So tonight, I think it depends on how things work out. I think we're gonna do an episode of Overtime tonight, and we're gonna cover what's been going on in the news. It looks like they're going to be clearing the CHOP or Chaz zone. I think a lot of people have already left it. There have been multiple shootings there, and it's been having issues. So it looks like they're going to attempt to clear it. The COVID cases are getting bad, and there's some numbers suggesting that they're going to actually get much worse reasonably quickly. We're going to try to parse that and get some information out to you guys about that later. Also, tomorrow we have on Christopher Mudabi tomorrow at 2 p.m. to.
See that? You made me curse. Yeah,
that's it. I get. Well, no, I have a thing going with Agrippa. Every time I get you to curse, I get whatever the Australian currency is there, like a kangaroo or whatever. I don't know. It's probably worthless.
Kangaroo is a currency in Australia?
Well, they got enough of them, but like I said, it's worthless. So it's more of just for shits and giggles. But at any rate. So tomorrow we have Christopher Maute back on to discuss the second half of this. We've got one more study that we're going to get into. Yep. That's going to be fun, and we're going to do one more study, and then we're also going to talk about some of the issues with these studies. We actually already touched on a couple of them, and then
from my perspective, but I mean, I can't wait to read this guy's critique, because if he validates what I said, I'm going to be walking on air.
I think you should totally, you get bragging rights. There's a question, there have been 5 shootings actually in the Chaz zone. Only 2 were covered because only 2 resulted in deaths, but there were 2 deaths in the Chaz zone. It's only been around for about 3 weeks, so there's been some problems. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, Chris is going to be coming back for the second half of this. We have a Patreon hangout coming out, so I hope you'll consider becoming a patron of the show. Our patrons get special access in the Discord. We have all sorts of things that we do with them. We're actually also, like I said, we're going to be starting streaming some of the back end to the Discord for patrons, and we have a patron hangout every month, which is a lot of fun. So I hope you guys will consider doing that. Also, we have a Second Amendment discussion with Xander in person. I'll cover that a little bit more when we get to it, but I think it's going to be a good discussion. He really knows what he's talking about. He is pro Second Amendment. I am against it, but we've had a lot of very good discussions on that. And what did you are now screen share? So we are okay. So this is basically Inception. In time, Inception. It's just a show
You're
inside
welcome.
a show. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I don't know why the CPU process. My CPU cycle is just it's just like what is Christopher?
It's the meta
You're just a
in
troublemaker. Time. Yeah. So and then we also are having Ozzy back with Dr. Richard Carrier to discuss the creation. I was going to say the inception. Now that you got that in my head, the creation or the inception of religious. We're going to be discussing the philosophy of. Was it philosophy of science? Yeah, how philosophy of science came from basic philosophy and religious studies and religions.
Philosophy.
Yeah. And religion's first attempts to try to understand the world and how science actually came from that. So the philosophy of science, how it came about. So we'll be having the two of them on, and we've got a couple other shows that are in the works. So we got a lot planned right now. We're going to retire, and we will be in the Discord. I'll be in the Discord in about 5 minutes. But thank you very much, Chris, for coming on. We really appreciate it. It was good. Yeah, it was good to see you again, and look forward to I'll catch you up. So thank you all for contributing. Again, like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and we will catch up with you guys in a few minutes.
I love it. It's me.